Morning, Commissioner. How are you?
Doing great, Representative. Good morning. Great to be here.
Good to see you.
All right, we're all set.
Okay. Do we want to start with Commissioner Lehman?
Yes.
Great. Thank you, Senator. So first off, great. Thank you for the opportunity to be here, and good morning to everyone. We appreciate the opportunity to answer questions around our annual report. We are committed to transparency and want to make sure that all questions get answered either here or through follow-up. I'm joined by many folks on the senior team at DECD that are part of the various programs, as well as the preparing of the report and the analysis that goes into the report. So I'm confident we'll be able to answer any and all questions, again, if not on this Zoom shortly thereafter. Just two last comments from me, and then we can get right into the questions. This is our third or fourth time, I think, doing this as part of the Lamont administration. And I just want to make a couple observations. First and foremost, in the first 3 years of the administration, especially compared to the last 3 years of the previous administration, we have made a deliberate emphasis to reduce many of the incentive programs and the bonding that has been done historically for business. So to put some numbers on it, in the 3 years before the Lamont administration, there was approximately $700 million in bonding to business incentives during that period. And that compares to just over $100 million during the first 3 years of this administration. So you've seen a 70+% decrease in bonding for these business incentives. And again, that was something we were very focused on doing for really two reasons. When we analyzed business incentives, one, what we found was many of the activities that businesses were going to do in terms of investment and job creation would have happened anyway. So the state could have utilized its resources elsewhere. Secondly, some, but not all of the programs were regressive, in my opinion, where you were providing assistance to entities, again, that may have been doing the project anyway, and ultimately that was borne by Connecticut taxpayers in the broad Connecticut tax base. So we are very focused on making sure that any incentive program that we are advocating or administering, has the right balance, that we're truly incentivizing business activity that otherwise really would not happen without the program. And then there is minimizing the cost and minimizing the risk to taxpayers. So we were very appreciative of the General Assembly passing our Job CT program, which basically reduces cost and reduces the risk and eliminates any need for bonding for job creation programs from businesses going forward. So that's been a big focus for us. I just wanted to make sure this group was aware of that significant decrease in bonding. It's something that we continue to believe in, and we'll continue to monitor it. Is Connecticut losing investment because we haven't been doing as many incentives? I don't believe so. So I think we want to stay the course. I think we want to minimize the cost to taxpayers while still having a very business-friendly environment. And I think that's something we can do and will do here in the state. That's all I wanted to say, Senator Austin, Representative Walker, and others. Again, we've got the full team here to answer questions. So back to you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. So relative to that conversation that you just had, and I certainly am appreciative of less bonding, but I'm also concerned that other states give significant bonding or financial resources to businesses that we may not do. And so I'm curious, what is your response to that concern? Are places like Texas and Florida, I see all the time, even ads on our local TV and radio here in Connecticut, we will give you X, Y, and Z. Do you see that as a different way to do business?
So, and here's where I think the data is important, Senator Austin, and I can probably count it. Again, I'm not suggesting I have full visibility into this, but I can count on one hand the number of potential investments and job increases in the state that, where it came down to the actual incentive, and the company was very focused on more money, otherwise they weren't going to come here. So it is a very, very small minority of companies that are saying we're only coming if it's the money. There have been a few, but it's very, very small. So I think the data is important. If we were, for example, if there was a sample size of 50 companies and 25 of them went to Florida because we weren't doing bonding, I would be coming back to this group saying we have a decision to make. I don't believe that's the case. I think tax certainty is very, very important to businesses. And I think that's probably the most important thing. And workforce, when I think about what's driving location decisions and growth decisions, investments in workforce while maintaining tax certainty, to me, that is the most important thing. And just maybe one anecdote, Senator, one thing which the General Assembly concurred that we were proponents of was the bill for the next generation Black Hawk and the next generation Scout at Sikorsky. And we were in competition with Texas in that example. And in my mind, that was and still is a transformational opportunity for the state. As best as I'm aware, the state of Texas actually did not step up to support Bell Helicopter, while we did step up to support Sikorsky. So I think there's sometimes there's a perception out there that isn't true. Florida does a lot of advertising, but I think the amount of money from those states in particular, especially because neither has an income tax, it's not that big. And
relative to the Sikorsky deal itself, my understanding is the Sikorsky deal had in it a component that said if they did not get that contract, that deal was null and void. Is that your understanding of that?
100%. Yeah. The only way that deal, that those incentives are available, they need to win 1 or 2 contracts. And if they don't win either, no money.
Okay, great. Are there any questions from colleagues? I see no hands up yet, but do you have questions? Representative Walker.
Good morning. Good morning, Madam Chair, and good morning, everybody, and good morning, Commissioner, again. Thank you for coming and talking to us today. Okay, so I've been reading the report. I have to say, it diverted us to a lot of different locations to get data, and I will let you know it's not the information, it's the operator. I could not get the listings on some of the things because I looked on some like the Urban Act dollars and things like that. I couldn't somehow extract that information. But what I want to ask you is, of all the economic development programs, what was the most successful in the ones that you managed? And which is the one that we need to do more work on? And what is your suggestions on how we do that?
That's a great question, and I will answer it, and Deputy Commissioner Dom is here as well. She may have an opinion as well. So when I think about the best dollars that are going out, again, I'm a big believer in consistency and transparency and simplicity in terms of our programs. So, Job CT was passed. I think that would be very successful. And I think we need to monitor the efficacy of that program. And again, that's low cost. The Brownfields program that DECD oversees, I can't stress enough how important those dollars are. Just the leverage factor and the difference between what the private sector wants to get paid versus what the state can do there. We need to do more brownfields, especially given we're a state with a lot of older manufacturing sites in our city. So brownfields, really, really important. I do think Urban Act, and obviously that's a slightly different process. I think those dollars are very important as well. I think we really need to be mindful of the process that we're running. So one of the parts of the economic action plan that was passed was the Connecticut Communities Challenge. And we'll do another round of that later this year, but for just under 50 million of state investment, that catalyzed 150 million of projects. So we're really focused on where are we getting third-party leverage, whether that's federal, local, or private, or some combination thereof. And Brownfields, the Communities Challenge, and at times Urban Act achieve that. And then for the job creation incentives, I think the simplicity of URA tax credits, Job CT, and the sales and use exemption, those are really the 3 main tools. I don't think we need more than that, and we have those tools, and I think we have sufficient capacity there. In terms of what I think may need to be examined, and this group's heard this from me in the past, but the film tax credit program and the digital media tax credit program, the cost of that continues to go up as more activity gets done in the state. And we've looked, there was a report done by Olsberg, and we've done kind of competitive benchmarking here, but the cost of that program continues to increase because of the 30% credit and just more activity. And we, Connecticut as a state, alongside the state of Georgia, has, in my opinion, being one of the most generous programs for digital media, and it's at a pretty considerable cost. So I think there should be a discussion. If there was a dialing back of certain programs that we oversee, that would be the one I would suggest that there's a discussion around. Two possibilities there. Other states cap the amount of their credits at a certain amount. That's something that could be considered. Again, the industry doesn't love that because it provides a little bit less certainty, but many other states do cap it, or you could reduce the amount of the credit. It's as high as 30% right now. Again, we have one of the best in class film tax credit programs, and we're always focused on balance. What's the right balance between the industry? And that program truly did create the industry in the state of Connecticut, but at what cost to taxpayers? And I think you always want to make sure that there is that equilibrium. So hopefully that answered your question, Rep. Walker. That's kind of where I think we do really good job with taxpayer money, and where I think we might want to look for more of a balance in the future.
I'd like to have that conversation about the film tax credit a little further later on, because I'd like to understand that, because I know that is starting to grow. And the other one would be minority development, minority business development. Where are we with that? And can I mean no defense, but minority development should be Black and brown and not gender. I really do believe that. I think because it really doesn't hit the real heart of the population that seems to be left behind. So as far as the minority development programs, how are those doing?
Yeah, so and we are very close to launching a new program focused on small businesses and new businesses. We're at 50%, and I heard your comment in terms of Black and brown and not gender, but the way that the programs, and we've really added this equity aspect to almost all, if not all, of what we've been doing in terms of DECD programming, but 50% of the funds from this new program that will be announced later this month or early July will be for minority or women-owned businesses and in our distressed municipalities. So our view is the state has discrete resources. We're doing less for some business recruitment, but this will be a $200 million program, 150 of it loans. We're actually going to get 70 million from the private sector as well. And our goal is to do loans as well as some technical assistance and grants focused on our hardest hit communities and areas that are just underbanked and haven't gotten as much funding. That's in addition to, I mentioned all other programs that DECD has done around business support. We're focused on trying to get to 50% of the funding we put out into areas focused on distressed municipalities, which I believe represent around a third of the state's population. So we are trying to disproportionately go where the private market isn't and be deliberate in that regard. And we'll continue to do that.
Well, thank you for your response. I would like to, again, second thought, talk about more about how we need to expand more. I want to say race-based, because those are, and I don't think that we've gotten enough, because we have to actually do the training. And I think you've been doing some of the training. We need to expand the training. So I look forward to that conversation later on. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. So, Commissioner, I've gotten a couple of texts from people that say that they'd like more of a presentation of the overview of what's in the report. So I don't know if you want to go back to that and see if there's anything that you want to highlight in there. And I didn't know if in particular you would highlight the hospitality industry when you're talking about the general report.
Yeah, when you say a presentation of the report, I mean, it's 50 pages and it's very, very broad. So I can summarize if that's helpful.
That would be great. People are asking me questions. And I just want to make sure that I'm giving you that opportunity to sort of say, this is what we see. You did talk a little bit about tax incentives and other things, and pointed out the fact that really the income tax in Connecticut is different than what's in Florida and Texas, for example. But if you wouldn't mind just mentioning a few highlights there, and then I have a lot of people that have a lot of questions, but they've all come on board for questions. But if you wouldn't mind just going back and just high level overview of the report.
Sure, and I want to be judicious. So the report, as I think folks know, this is the 4th or 5th year of the report, focused on transparency. And what we try to do with the report is, of the programs that DECD oversees, we provide as much analysis and data as we can, the cost of the program versus the benefits of the program, jobs created, as well as what we call a REMI analysis, which is an economic impact analysis focused on the direct jobs. We try to be as specific as we can, as well as looking at both what we call the indirect and induced jobs. So whether it's the supply chain or the restaurants and dry cleaners, for example, of a new manufacturer coming to town. So we try to go through each program and make a judgment in the report. Should this program continue? Should it be amended? Should it be discontinued? So it's objective in many ways, and looking back over the past year and cumulatively of these programs, are these good programs? Are they providing an ROI to taxpayers that we think is appropriate, that DECD thinks is appropriate? In addition, in the report, for those that haven't had a chance to read it, we go through other programs that we don't necessarily administer. We don't administer. For example, Connecticut Innovations does many programs like the Angel Investor Tax Credit, but we do report out on those programs. We get information from them and we'll put it in the report. So it's as comprehensive as it can be around economic development activities and those programs. So it runs the gamut from the Manufacturing Assistance Act to some of the special acts that have been done around manufacturers to the Angel Investor Tax Credit. So it's very, very broad. So for folks that haven't had a chance to read it, I would encourage them to do so. You can do it in 30 or 45 minutes. And I think the question Rep. Walker asked is the right one, which is, if we had to rank, what are the top 3 or top 5 programs that DECD believes are very effective, and what are the ones that should be considered, whether it's next year or in the future, for potential tweaks and adjustments because they're not having the ROI or the output that is appropriate. And then I'll just reiterate what I said at the outset. I mean, when I first sat in this seat in 2019, we spent a lot of time looking at the effectiveness of incentives, right? It's a competitive world out there. Other states are competing for our business and vice versa. So I don't think you can have a world, and I know some folks feel that we should just have no incentives. That sounds nice if every state does it, but that's just not happening. So what we're trying to do is have transparent, simple incentives that are low cost and low risk for the Connecticut taxpayer. And that's why we've decreased the amount of incentives pretty significantly. And the key is to do so without losing our edge in terms of business growth.
So thank you for that. I'm going to go to the chairs of the other committees. Senator Fonfara, do you have any comments or questions?
I have a few, Madam Chair. Thanks very much. Good morning, Commissioner.
Morning.
With respect, and in the report itself, it indicates that the sales and use tax exemption is under CI. And I don't recall why we did that, but it just logically doesn't make sense to me why your agency would not have that responsibility. Can you give us some insight into that?
So that predates me, and I'm not sure what the genesis of that was. Others may know. I would say, Senator, though, and I sit as, in my role, I sit as vice chairman of CI, and I sit on the decision-making board around sales and use exemptions. So I certainly think it could be DECD. One of the benefits of having it at CI is you do have others, for example, John Olson is on the board of CI and focused on the sales and use exemption. So you have others that are kind of opining on if a project has merit or not for a sales and use exemption. So we haven't had any issues with the current governance structure. I think it could be either way, but there's a lot of consistent dialogue, frictionless dialogue between DECD and CI, given my role at CI.
Yeah, I have no issue with the CI and its leadership and the work that it does. Just don't know what the qualifications are for that quasi to have that responsibility versus your agency. But anyway,
it could be either place, but agree.
Commissioner, with respect to incentives, is there anywhere in the administration now or prior to yours that looks at the total cost of doing business in Connecticut? In the report you talk about, and I agree with it completely, that new jobs or jobs in general generate income taxes, but also generate sales taxes and a host of other revenues that benefit this running of the state. But I don't know where we, and maybe you can help me understand this, where we actually look at the total cost of doing business in Connecticut. Besides incentives, this comprehensive look at, things such as unemployment compensation, workers' comp, property taxes, utility costs, which we bury a lot of taxes in the utility bill that aren't so obvious, but they hit people hard, and they're very regressive. But in general, in terms of a business deciding to hire and the barriers to doing that, the disincentives to doing that, I know that with respect to certain projects, you have this comprehensive review between your agency and, as an example, with DEEP, you have quite a few references to that in the report. But more comprehensively, is there a process, or should we have a process that does that?
So great question. Just a few things. So most of the analysis in the report we do on direct economic benefit. We will make assumptions, Senator, around sales tax as well as income tax. So we do try to be holistic in terms of revenues coming in from incentive programs and then expenses. But going back to your question about just the cost of doing business. So there actually is a fair amount of analysis. I think it's maybe Ernst & Young or KPMG, some of the global consulting firms and accounting firms do provide this. And the reason why it's best, in my opinion, done, by someone like Ernst & Young or KPMG is the cost of business is going to vary by industry. And then within that industry, are you small, medium, and large? Are you a new business or an established manufacturer? So there's roughly 10 or so classifications that they'll do. And they will, Ernst & Young, for example, will compare Connecticut across industries versus 49 other states across those same industries. And then they'll say, what's the best place to start a data center or a new tech company or a manufacturer? And, they touch a lot of different taxes. So we can provide that report to this group. I think that is just given the complexity of assumptions. I think we as a state government are best served to look to folks like Ernst & Young and KPMG to provide that report, but I will will certainly take your direction. It requires a lot of analysis, these types of reports.
A couple other things really quickly. See a lot of hands. In the report also, and the Finance Committee and Commerce Committee did some work in this regard and continues to do work in this regard with respect to talent retention and attraction. For me, talent drives as much, if not more than anything else in Connecticut, or our lack of retaining talent in keeping and attracting businesses than anything else. And I don't think we spend as a legislature anywhere near enough time on that issue. And maybe you can opine on what we could be doing better as a state, as a legislature, how we could help you we educate better than just about any other state. We spend over $10 billion a year in property tax. About 80% of that goes to education, and we don't do enough to keep that talent here, which is a broader question, obviously, in terms of what attracts talent. Why do people want to come to Connecticut or not come to Connecticut if they're not here already? Or how do we keep primarily those that we're educating so well to stay here? So
sure.
If you could speak to that.
Well, as a coincidence, I'm actually at Central Connecticut State University this morning for a Governor's Workforce Council Regional Sector Partnership meeting. So I think I concur wholeheartedly. Talent has been, and I think will continue to be, when I think about our strengths and what the edge or competitive advantage is for Connecticut, it is around workforce and talent across industries. So we need to continue to invest there. My personal view, and Kelly's not here with me in the room, but I'll just speak my own mind here. I do think the Workforce Council initiatives and these regional sector partnerships where you have the private sector, educators, and state and local governments all at the same table. And I do think the private sector needs to continue to lead. The world's just changing so fast. I don't think it's, I think we need to stay very close to our businesses, because I think it's dangerous if government or educators make assumptions around what skills are necessary. So my opinion is more investment in terms of the Office of Workforce Strategy and making sure that we have the right folks around the table to advocate for workforce and talent initiatives, really important. I mean, I think the continuing to invest in education at the higher ed level and the skills level, I think is really, really important, but we need to make sure we're doing that in conjunction with business in the state. Otherwise we risk, obsolescence, and that's not where any of us will need to be. So I think that's where the resources and focus should continue to be, Senator.
Commissioner, if you could provide for the joint committees here your position on providing other attractions, if you will, the non-job related to considerations that a young person in particular who have choices as to where they're going to work and where they're going to live, and how we're doing in that regard and what we as a legislature could do better. And lastly from me, on the community development part of your report, it's rather thin compared to the rest of it. I couldn't agree more with Representative Walker's point in terms of where we are lacking in terms of minority support for businesses and jobs and training. I appreciate the support that you provided in terms of the legislation this session on community development corporations and the support within your agency. But that's an area, community development, where, as an example, brownfields or Urban Reinvestment Act tax credits, a significant amount of investment over the last 10 years in that regard. But we don't know if the employees of those businesses that may be located in underserved communities are necessarily residents of those communities. And our legislation does not require that to even be a consideration, and it ought to be. We have concentrated poverty in our cities in this state that breeds additional poverty. And we could be doing better in terms of combating that. And I'd like to be part of the conversation of how we could address some of those things within this legislation in terms of those two tax credits in particular.
100%. And we'll do the follow-up in terms of your question. Just one brief comment before we continue, though. I think when this hearing is happening next year, now that with the community development legislation, Senator, that you sponsored, which passed, as well as all the work around the community investment fund, which there'll be an event actually later this afternoon, plus more, we can be more deliberate in terms of what we're doing in Brownfields and Urban Act in those specific communities, as well as some of the enterprise zone stuff. So let us take that feedback, because I think there is a lot going on in the community development, but we need to provide more transparency, and then some of the significant funding for CIF. I think you're going to see that, plus other initiatives in the report going forward, and that'll be a bigger component, because candidly, that's where the money's going now, as opposed to some of these legacy business incentive programs.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate the indulgence of the committees.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator. Is Representative Scanlon here? I don't see him. So I'll go to Senator Hartley, Commerce Chair.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Good morning, all, and Commissioner and team. Thanks for being with us. So let me just say that, it's been quite a couple of years here, and the department, DECD, has been front and center through all of it. So I want to recognize and thank you for that yeoman's effort. But the annual report that we have in front of us is also very important, an opportunity to kind of dig in. So one, I just want to say we've made some significant changes to the metrics and the requirements for this report, so as to allow your team and also the limited bandwidth that you operate with to have the benefit. How is that working out? Number one.
From my vantage point, it's going well. And I think the clarity, and Kara is here, as well as Nanika, who do a lot of the work around the report. I think it's welcome, and we're appreciative of that. And we expect, our goal is to be very specific on programs that we oversee, where we're controlling the dials, and provide as much detail as we can there. So all good from my perspective, but the team should jump in if they have a different view.
Yeah, so we want to maximize, obviously, your time and talent, and that's important. On the other hand, it's really important for us to be able to wrap our arms around the operations of this department because it is so crucial. I have a couple of questions specifically on programs, Mr. Commissioner. First of all, we're doing this pivot from MAA to Job CT. And I think that, the principles that it's based upon are sound. However, we had, I think about 43 million left in the MAA unallocated bond funds. And I'm wondering, now that we're doing that switch, what is the department's intention with regard to MAA going forward?
Yeah, so really two things. Great question. And yes, we will not need to utilize MAA prospectively because of Job CT. There won't be bonding. The usage for the residual revolving MAA money is really twofold. One is for some of the Jobs CT style, the grant and arrears style business growth transactions that have been done with companies or agreements with companies that have been done over the past 18 months. And then more significantly, we've utilized and will utilize the MA revolver for parts of either the Connecticut Communities Challenge and mostly the Innovation Corridor Initiative that we're still running. So it'll be utilized for the economic action plan that we're executing right now and grant and arrears transactions prior to Job CT.
Do you have a sense of, what the arrears might be and what the real number is we're working on with regard to Connecticut, the Innovation Challenge and the Community Challenge?
We can get you a full breakout, Senator. I think for the business related support over the next decade, I want to say it's in the $40 to $50 million range, but let us get you a breakout of Job CT or grant and arrears and then Communities Challenge and or Innovation Corridor so you can see the utilization of the revolver.
Yeah, that would be important. Thank you, Commissioner. And then also the report shows that in FY21, there was about 86 million, 86.5 in loans forgiven. And then in 20, if you go back and look, it was about 16. What's the difference there? Why such a big difference?
Which page are you on, Senator, if you don't mind?
So it's page 22.
So as I'm pulling it up, my instinct is, and I'll be pulling up the page, is that in FY20, because of the pandemic, what we did when forgiveness was to be achieved by companies, we granted a 12-month extension because of the pandemic. So if you needed to have certain jobs hurdles met at a certain point in 2020, we said, okay, we'll give you 12 more months because of the disruption to the economy. And that's why you're seeing, most likely why you're not seeing it in 2020, but you are seeing a lot more in 2021 as the economy started to recover.
And so then I'm assuming that's the same thing. So this was in the MAA, but I'm assuming that must be the same thing for the bridge loan too then, because that was a 12-month balloon payment. And you could do a 6-month, push out extension. And so that number was about 40 million was awarded and about 3 thus far, I'm understanding, has been paid back.
Correct. So just maybe a couple of things. So yes, and that was as of at the end of last summer. So we can get you a more updated number and you'll see one obviously in the next report as more and more of the bridge loans do get paid back. We just for good housekeeping here though, since we've been in office, since the administration has been in office, we have not done forgivable loans. I mean, there may be 1 or 2 exceptions, but we've stayed away from that. So forgiveness you're seeing, whether it's in 20 or 21, in my opinion, it should be looked at holistically. And those are deals done under the previous framework of capital upfront and forgiveness earned. And again, the reason I think you're seeing that disconnect between 20 and 21 is because of the pandemic. So, but the loan programs we've run, by and large, there was one exception during the pandemic that we used some in the Minority Business Initiative, but we have stayed away from forgivable loans, and we intend to continue to do so. Certainly for big business.
I understand and endorse that. So I have a number of other questions, but I just at this point want to mention something, Commissioner. The Brokers Academy, are you familiar with that program? because we're talking, a number of representatives, senators talked about, this focus on small and minority businesses, and then also the, particular laser focus on Black and brown businesses. Are you in any way tied into this Brokers Academy or aware of it?
Not that I am aware of. So
Okay.
I see
So
I was shaking her head too. So happy
Yeah.
to get involved if it's appropriate.
Well, so let me just give you the thumbnail here, because it is small business. It is targeted to Black and brown businesses. It is launched as a pilot by the insurance department, and essentially the mission is twofold. It is to license and certify minority individuals so that they can stand up an insurance business, health, life, get them credentialed. It has been done in 3 cities. Waterbury got shoehorned in with a lot of push as a pilot, but the plan is to hopefully scale this statewide. And I think the Department of Economic and Community Development should definitely play a role in this. It provides the training and the certification and the technology to get inner city underserved communities licensed, and then have them work with mentors to develop a book of business so that they stand up their own business. At the same time, we are reaching people where they are to get them insured. Most importantly, health insurance, as we've seen over these last 24 months. But I think that this is a program that should be done in conjunction, because these are the goals of DECD, and I would like to see that done collectively.
I appreciate that. So we can reach out to Commissioner Mays and CID on that.
Yes, I would greatly appreciate it. So anyway, thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll just at this moment leave my other questions for later. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Curry, co-chair Commerce.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, Commissioner, and to your entire team. Really appreciate all the work that you all partnered with us over this last session and during this stint over on the Commerce Committee. Just a couple clarifying questions. You mentioned CI, and this year there was a lot of confusion and discussion in the General Assembly with regards to the relationship between DECD and CI and what we're responsible for, what we're not. Can you just quickly kind of clarify that role?
Yeah, I mean, so CI is a quasi with its own board, its own governance structure. As a function of my role as DCD commissioner, I have a board seat on CI, and it's a very active role in the board-related governance there, as well as I work very closely with CI's CEO, just given their focus, but totally separate entity that we are connected to through the governance structure on the board.
Okay, and they take care of their own private audits. They hire companies to take care of all of that on their own, correct?
Correct. Yeah, that is 100% correct.
All right, thanks. Now you touched on evaluating programs. You mentioned the film credits and the entity that you hired, the consultants to come in to evaluate that. Can you kind of just further discuss overall evaluations of the various programs, meeting benchmarks, the retention of jobs, the type of jobs, kind of get a little bit more into the detail on those things?
Yeah, and Representative, just to be clear, Curry, you'd like to each program, or you want me to start with the film program? I just don't know. There's many programs. I just want to make sure I'm not overstaying my welcome in answering your question.
No, I think folks would be interested in hearing kind of the overall evaluation of your programs.
Great. So on, well, again, and just interrupt if I'm going too slow. So in terms of the large programs, and again, here, I think it is important. We're going to talk about what was done in the past as opposed to what's being done prospectively. The two largest programs where bonding has been utilized was what was the Manufacturing Assistance Act, and ultimately the First 5 program as well, or First 5 Plus, I would include in that, as well as the Small Business Express program. And the way that we run the analysis, those programs have met their goal. And when I say met, what I mean is, and this is where I think it's typically not a yes versus no question. There's gradations of success here, but are the revenues from the new jobs exceeding the cost of the program, the cost of the credits or the cost of the forgiveness. And by and large, in really all of the programs, but certainly the two that I mentioned, yes is the answer. Why we've elected to not proceed in those programs, as I've mentioned in my intro, one of the key questions that you need to ask when you're talking about these programs are you catalyzing something that otherwise wouldn't have happened? So, would certain companies stay and grow in the state anyway, even if they didn't get certain funding? And that's, you need to put some probability on that, in my opinion. But if you assume that wouldn't have been the case, all of those two significant programs, the Manufacturing Assistance Act and Small Business Express, but their benefits do outweigh their costs. When I mentioned the film program before, and there's a lot of assumptions here. Let me just say that first. And we had a study done, as you alluded to. But when you think about the cost of taxpayers versus the benefit to taxpayers, I think there is an open question: does the cost exceed the benefit here? And I think that's something that General Assembly should explore, again, whether it's a cap or a slightly different amount, because when we look kind of per capita film credits, and again, you have to look, you can't just look at one metric to say yes or no, but when you look at per capita incentives in the film industry, Connecticut and the state of Georgia are 1 and 2, depending on how you define it. And there's a sharp fall off after that. So we, again, very, very generous there. When I look at there were a number of different special act programs, like for example, the Lockheed Martin program in 2017 or 2018. And again, meeting all of those programs are meeting and or exceeding what we expected at the time. So nothing I would flag there for this group. Looking at the R&D tax credit program, there were 2 awards there, one to ASML, one to Boehringer Ingelheim. Again, same comment, they are meeting or exceeding what was expected when those grants were awarded. URA tax credits, and you see in Representative Curry, if I'm going too slow, you got to stop me here. The URA tax credits, I mentioned at the outset, this is a program we do like for a couple of main reasons. It's consistent with what we call earn as you grow. So when we award these tax credits, no dollars are going out up front. URA tax credits are earned in year 4 through 10. So the burden is on the investor or the company to make the investment, to create the jobs and maintain them. So we really like this kind of show me performance framework when we're giving out these incentives, and URA tax credits are fully aligned with that. And again, the cost relative to the benefit, this makes sense for taxpayers for sure. Digital media we touched on. The Insurance Reinvestment Fund, let me just talk about that for a sec, since I haven't to date. And another tranche of that was greenlit previously. This is a program, and we did. There was some tweaks, I would say, to this program. Focused on equity in terms of where some of this investment goes, trying to reduce the cost in terms of dollars per job created in the insurance program. And I think with those tweaks in terms of how that program is going to be administered, we do think this is a program that does make sense and is spurring investment in Connecticut that otherwise would not have happened. So we want to track this third tranche of the program, and we'll do that carefully. But we believe that is a program, again, that is meeting what is required. And I think that this next tranche will actually be more successful in terms of return to Connecticut taxpayers. On the community development side, enterprise zones, and I should have mentioned this at the outset when Rep. Walker asked what are successful programs. I do think the enterprise zone program is an important program for really 2 main reasons. One, it's a way for the state to support communities, as we've talked about, expand their grant lists. And secondly, and I know I sound like a broken record, but consistency and simplicity matters, right? Everyone wants a bespoke tax abatement, but having a clear 5-year abatement for certain communities where the state is participating in that, I think makes a lot of sense. And businesses want clarity. They don't want to know they need to negotiate with Joe or Jane. They want to understand what that clarity is. And in my opinion, the enterprise zone program does that. Let me stop there. The other programs are some of the CI programs, sales and use. Senator Fonfara mentioned that before. We think that program is also important and are very, very supportive of that. We typically have advocated for that. And again, you'll see we're doing a lot less of this than was done previously, but we try to utilize this program with the URA program. So there is some reduced cost up front in sales and use credits, and then some benefit over time, again, where the burden's on the investor. So Rep. Curry, I'm gonna stop there before I lose everyone, but I can answer more specific questions. But overall, that's kind of how we see things.
No, I appreciate that response, and I think it's important that folks hear that. You can take as much time as you want on something like that, only because you don't want folks to walk away thinking that you and your folks aren't taking the deep dive, and we appreciate that, and we're glad to hear the successes that you're having, and hopefully we'll continue to have. You mentioned the enterprise zone and simplicity and all that sorts of stuff. I just want to make sure that we're very careful that we don't start to tweak some of these programs. No shade down to Stanford, but I know we tweaked a little bit so that they were able to keep a little bit of some of that area within that zone and gave new qualifiers. I think if we start to do things like that, we're getting away from the intent of what the enterprise zone or other programs might have been at that time. So I think that's just something that we need to be very cautious of. But again, I appreciate your time today, all your team's work, and look forward to working with you all prior to next session to see what we can do. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Representative Curry. Next is Senator Martin, Ranking Member of Finance and Commerce, I do believe, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Commissioner, for coming, and your staff as well. Just a few questions. I like the idea of prioritizing and evaluating each of these programs. And you highlighted something that came to my mind was that the film industry, because of the 30% tax credit that we're providing there. But also in your report is the angel investment tax credit, which is a 25%. And I know that you don't have an analysis of that, but can you speak to that just a little bit? And it seems like 25% on every dollar investment by the investor seems like a lot to me. And where would you place this in your priority of evaluation?
Yeah, it's a good question. And you know, respectfully, I want to just be careful not to conflate two different things, because the angel investor credit, where it is 25% versus the 30, but that is, you know, those are equity investments into very risky companies, as opposed to in the film tax credit, we're given a 30% rebate on bona fide production expenses for very large, well-established companies. So my only point there, Senator Martin, is there's a very big difference in risk and risk allocation between the two, even though it's 25 versus 30. All that said, the angel program, I am a supporter of it, and why for a couple of reasons. And there are a lot of assumptions in terms of the return on that program, but I'm a supporter because when I think about the future of Connecticut, it's going to be largely the knowledge economy. It's going to be high growth companies, whether that's manufacturing, life sciences, information technology, and the angel investor program, in my opinion, is spurring considerable investment. And you've seen this just in the growth of CI and CI's portfolio. So it's one of many tools to really incentivize the information economy. But it's very tough. Most of the time, I would say, well, how much growth are we going to get without the angel program? It's very difficult, unlike some other programs where I can have a strong opinion, to say this is the exact kind of marginal benefit, other than we're clearly seeing an ecosystem that's growing. If you look at the amount of startup companies, the amount of venture that's coming into the state, and I do think the angel program is helpful in that. If it ever got too big, or arguably too big, you know, there are dials that I would suggest using, just like the film program, you know, reducing the amount, whether that's 25 to something lower, or capping, and I think we do this actually, the amount per year that can be utilized. So supportive of the program, a little bit tougher to measure than some of the other programs, in my opinion. But, you know, I think here, because of what you're starting, potentially very high growth companies, you want to err on the side of potentially being a bit more generous. Whereas in other areas, I actually think you don't want to err on that side.
Sure. All right, thank you. On page 23, it's the business assistance. It's a jobs and the audit of those jobs. You know, how often, I guess my question is, how often are those audits done? And then as well as what happens if the goals aren't met?
So annually is the question, the answer to your first question, by and large. Some of the legacy deals had, you know, there was a pre-established job audit date in the future, but for job CT program, because the benefit's going to be earned over the decade, it's going to be per annum. So prospectively annually, and by and large, we're doing stuff annually or before money is allocated. And if job hurdles not met, either the benefit to the company is either eliminated or reduced ratably. So for example, Senator, if they achieved 80% of their jobs, the benefit may be 80% of what the previous benefit would have been should they have met their hurdles.
So this only applies to the job CT, this portion of it?
Well, this portion is actually backward looking. So this is really looking at a lot of the MAA transactions, the previous way of doing things in terms of forgivable loans. So job CT, though, when this conversation is happening in 3 years or 5 years, you will see the same thing for job CT, and we'll break that out likely differently than we do it here because there's also a different cost. But the concept of annual audits, and then if a company achieves 90 or 80% of their job creation, the benefit will be your 80 or 90%. We don't think it's smart or good policy for there to be a cliff where all of a sudden the benefit goes from $100 to zero. In our mind, it should go from 100 to 80, and that resonates more with companies too.
I get that regarding the job CT, but regarding the MAA, is there anything? If a company didn't meet its goal, is there anything that we can claw back and?
Yes. So if a company didn't meet its goal and they were forfeiting all or a portion in my example before, then that money is not typically, if it was $1 million loan to make an example and half of it would have been forgiven and they didn't meet their hurdles and they're entitled to no forgiveness, then the company still owes the state of Connecticut $1 million. And then we would expect to be repaid and have various rights in terms of enforcing should we need to pursue that.
Great, thank you. On page 24, regarding the wage analysis, you provide the number of jobs created, and there's an average of I guess medium and high wages, low wages, and the median. But can you tell us? And it wasn't in the report, and that's why I'm asking: is how much state revenue are we generating from the personal income tax revenue that these jobs are creating?
I need, if it's not, I thought that was in the report. If it's not, I need to get that to you.
Okay. Yeah, that would be great to know. We've created, let's say, I don't know, 40,000 jobs, and the average is 50,000 a year. How much revenue, state income tax revenue, are we gaining from these new jobs? My last question, Commissioner, is relative to page 29, and it shows a cost. It cost us like $200,000 per job that we created. It seems like an excessive amount of money that we invested to create these jobs. Can you explain that?
Yes, I will. Let me just, I want to go back to your previous question, Senator, if it's all right. So on page 26, you have the net direct revenue per job of the MAA program. So again, this is net, and you see it cumulatively for 7,000 jobs. So that is net revenues less net expenses. So income tax as well as a sales tax assumption, Senator. And you can see positive revenues to the state of 15 million per year, cumulatively 150 million over that 10-year period, 2012 through 21. So we can kind of get more granular, but in terms of the net benefit of the MAA program from the previous tables, that is table 27.
So is that after the actual cost, the cost per employee?
Yeah, so the REMI model has an assumption around revenues less, including costs, which we think is the right way. So that's why it's there as a net state revenue.
Great, thank you.
So on page 29, why this astronomical figure of table 30, is that what you're referencing?
Yes.
Yeah, so my understanding, and this is something we're contemplating adjusting next year, is that electric boat, the special act that was done with electric boat, portions of that was through the Manufacturing Assistance Act, and portion of it was done through a special act. So this does not, and what we're very focused on is eliminating double counting. So if an entity is getting two different incentives, we don't want to count the same job twice because that misstates, it would understate the assistance. So here it's very, very conservative. If anything, we're overstating the benefit of these jobs. So what we would like to do in the future is try to give a holistic picture of the electric boat transaction per job, including the special act and MAA.
So will that number go down in the future?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, it will be. If you look holistically, because of the grants, what we want to do is this number will go down, and the electric boats MAA dollars will go up. So it will have a much more moderating effect, though, on the thousands of jobs at electric boat. So let us come back to you with that, because we actually should make sure there's clarity. We are not supporting jobs to the tune of $200,000 a job. Let me assure you of that.
Just one more question regarding the revenue earned per dollar of state contribution. I've seen it in the enterprise chart and a few other charts, and then in some other programs it's not provided. In your opinion, what is the sweet spot that we're looking for? Because one of the programs has $3.43, which seems the target zone. Yet another program, and I don't recall which one, but it was like $1.
Yep.
$1.10 or $1.20 to every dollar we invested. What's the sweet spot?
So assuming, and this is where, again, it's multivariate in my opinion. So assuming you have real visibility that none of the activity would happen without the program, then you want to be at 1. But I don't think it's fair. I mean, you want at least as much revenue as cost, and we should obviously strive for more than that. But if you assume 50% of the activity would otherwise happen, then in my opinion, you want to be at 2, for example, because that way you're really covering your costs, because arguably some of that revenue would have otherwise happened. So the very short answer, Senator, is the higher the better. But I think you certainly want to be well above 1, and I would argue you'd like to be above 2 for a very well performing program.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Martin. And I have Representative Cheeseman, ranking member on finance. Ma'am, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Good to see you, Commissioner Lehman. 2 questions. Looking at all the programs that you administer, what percentage of them would you say are targeted to small and medium-sized businesses, which, as you know, make up 80% of the businesses in the state of Connecticut? Well,
so, and when you ask by program number or by amount of funding?
A percentage. So, there are a wide range of programs. Obviously, some of them are much more geared toward larger companies, but which ones, in percentage terms, are specifically available to small and medium-sized businesses?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's going to be principally one main program for small and medium-sized businesses, as I mentioned before, which will be further detailed this summer. My hope, though, Senator, and when I think about the programs for large businesses, again, it depends how you quantify or qualify large. But there's the Job CT program, and I do want to come back to that, and then the URA tax credits and sales and use. Those are the principal programs. So there's 3 there. They do tend to work together, and for the most part, it's really Job CT is for the larger businesses. Where I'm going with this, though, is just very quickly, the burden to be eligible for Job CT was 25 or more jobs created in the state over a 2-year period. And my hope is, and we're in the process of operationalizing Job CT, but in a world where there is little to no friction and we can minimize or eliminate fraud risk, that 25 hurdle in terms of Job CT, we'd like to see that come down. I think from a policy perspective, you want to make sure it's as level playing field as possible there. The reason we settled on 25 is as we embark in the program, there is still a significant oversight cost to that program. And the last thing we want to be doing is setting the level, in my opinion, Rep. Cheeseman, at 5 or 10 jobs created, which would certainly more advantage smaller and medium-sized businesses. But then the cost of administration exceeds the benefit to the state. So that's maybe a long-winded answer, but my hope is when this conversation is had next year or 2 years from now, that the Job CT framework can be expanded to include more small to medium-sized businesses.
I know certainly from the Secretary of State's figures during the pandemic, we saw a record number of new businesses created. And obviously, the hope is they're going to grow into businesses that employ tens, if not hundreds of people. But for many of them, that's not going to be the case. On the other hand, given the cost of startup, how do we incentivize, and as a state, encourage that, again, particularly with regard to my colleagues' conversations, in minority communities from people who may not have access to traditional capital. My other question, and it's sort of looking at Senator von Farr's question from another point of view, he mentioned the cost of doing business in Connecticut. Do you, as DECD, look at the cost in terms of regulatory burdens on businesses? And again, I'm wearing my small business person hat. We've seen in the last number of years a number of new programs, perfectly worthy on the surface, that require significant amount of time in terms of administering them, whether it's mandatory sexual harassment training, putting in place, new protocols for paid family and medical leave. DOL is rolling out a new website that employers are going to have to access. We have the CT savings plan. There are a lot of things we expect of our businesses that come with a cost. And when you as DCD, or, again, with relation to Senator von Farr's question, do you look at the regulatory burden and the cost that places on Connecticut businesses as you consider things in terms of the business climate in Connecticut?
So we do. And let me just underscore this point you mentioned before, which is, Connecticut continues to see record small business formation. So we look at what's called high propensity business starts. And on average, Connecticut you're seeing 1,100 new businesses start per month. And these are businesses that intend to hire and intend to grow in the state. That compares to 700 to 800 pre-pandemic. And that's about as high as we've seen in Connecticut since 2005 or 2006. So we're seeing a 40% increase in business starts. We need to continue to do that. Rep. Cheeseman, to your point, these are the businesses, it's small to medium-sized businesses that are the ones that grow jobs. It's typically not the largest employers. It's just the law of large numbers. At some point, if you employ 10,000 people, and there are exceptions like Electric Boat, like what Sikorsky we hope will be doing. But getting to your question, we do look at the regulatory burden, and what's challenging though with the regulatory burden is it is at times tough to quantify, and in a divided world, unfortunately, some of these things have become political. In my mind, they shouldn't be. But we do look at the regulatory burden and the burden on businesses. And empirically, Connecticut has not ranked very well in some of these surveys, but many of them are just perception, candidly. And there are some that have used kind of big data sources looking at the amount of regulations and how many times the word must is in certain regulations, for example. And we rank better in those examples. So my personal view here is, perception, I think, has become reality to a certain extent. I think continuing to support business through programs, through tax certainty, through things like the legislature supported phasing out the capital base tax. In my mind, that's absolutely something that we need to do, and I would argue we should accelerate that, given that is focused solely on startups, and we don't want taxes that stand out relative to other states. So on my list of problems and concerns, regulations is there, but I probably would focus more on the talent development front as kind of the key, especially in a tight labor market that I don't see abating in the near future.
Yeah, I know, I appreciate that, but I do think, again, you as you stated, it's small and medium-sized businesses who are going to create the most number of jobs. And I think too often we as a legislature look at all businesses as though they all have legal departments, compliance departments, HR departments, all these things to administer the increasing number of policies, et cetera, we put in place that we then demand of those businesses. But that's my ad for the day in terms of let's look more holistically as we do this and recognize that not every business is going to have the resources that a Sikorsky or Pratt & Whitney or EB as we put policies in place going forward.
No, I agree with that, Representative. There's a balance that's needed there. So, and last thing, and I should have said this beforehand, is I think what's most important though is let's track empirically how we're doing on business formation. Are we underperforming the US or the region, or are we outperforming? And over the recent past, and again, we'll need to track this, we've been performing in line, certainly with the region and in many aspects, the country. So I think we just need to keep looking at the data. Where are we lacking, as opposed to making subjective judgments on some of this, and make sure that we're performing in line with how we should be performing in terms of business formation, job creation, and, in my opinion, population growth.
And with business formation, again, business survival, because you can form as many businesses as you want, but if they're going to die for whatever reason, then it's not a net gain. All right. Thank you for your answers as ever. And thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Representative Cheeseman. And I'm just going to go through the ranking members that have not spoken yet, because some of them are on phones, may not be able to put their hands up. So I have Senator Minor on the phone. on his way in. Senator Minor, did you have anything that you wanted to add to the conversation? You muted yourself.
I'm all set, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Representative France. And Representative Buckby. And Representative Scanlon. So I think I've hit everybody. We're going to go to everybody else who has their hands up now. I have Representative Bora. Ma'am, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. And hi, David. Thank you for being here. This is very helpful. There's been a lot of conversation around the movie and entertainment industry, and I don't want to belabor it because I know we've talked a lot about it, but to Representative Curry's point, we don't necessarily want to go backwards, but to your point, we should always evaluate a program to see if it's working. So my question is, do you have that cost benefit analysis already, or is that something that your department can do and let us know, how many jobs has it created? What does it mean to the local taxes for the individual cities, et cetera?
So thank you for the question. We in the Olsberg's report, so Representative, and there's a link in the annual report to it. We did commission an economic impact study that was done. It took over a year to do, so it was very comprehensive. It engaged the private sector in the state, in the film and digital media industry. So I would encourage you and others to take a quick look at it. There's a very good executive summary. I'll attempt to summarize it here, and how I think about it, or my interpretation of that report is, the film tax credit that started, I think, close to 20 years ago. At this point, or 15 years ago, that was key in expanding the digital media industry in the state of Connecticut. So, supports, and I believe the number is close to 10,000 jobs. I could be off by a bit, but significant job growth as a result of it, and significant increase in GDP or output from that industry. So very clear that program did that into the industry and really supported the industry. What is less clear and what is harder to do, in my opinion, is figuring out at what cost, right? Did the industry go here at the expense of, at a great expense to the tax base, given the up to 30% credit that is available for that industry? And again, other states have not a dissimilar amount of credit, but some cap, for example, the amount of benefit. So I think that's where some judgment is ultimately going to need to be had and put in place if there is a change to that program. And maybe it doesn't change. Again, it's a competitive market, but the cost to the typical taxpayer is the question around that, because it clearly, without question, jump-started the jobs, jump-started the output, but we want to make sure that that's not at too great a cost to everyone else.
Okay, great. I will take a look at that addendum. And then my other question is around arts, culture, and tourism, which we know is an important and wise investment. I see that in 2019, the economic impact on travel report showed that tourism activity indirectly or directly benefits many, many businesses in Connecticut, and that the travel industry created $15 billion in spend in Connecticut, which is significant. So I know the investments that we've been making in the arts, and I applaud that, and also in culture through our preservation office and a lot of the venues that have requested funding. But on tourism, I don't see a lot of tax incentives around like large venues, conventions, large sporting events. Do they not request them? Is there not an appetite for them? Because we know that bringing people in the state for a national convention, for example, can really bring a lot of funds invested into the economy. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So a couple of things off the bat. One, the state through CRDA and other means in terms of the general fund supporting, whether it's the convention center, providing a backstop to operations at places like the convention center, the state is doing that, whether it's through DECD or, kind of a sister or partner or organization, as well as marketing funds, for groups that are looking to attract conventions to Connecticut or various out-of-state whether it's business or leisure, to come into the state of Connecticut. So I feel like from an operating support and a backstop to some of the real estate operations, the state is doing that. What's challenging, and obviously there's other things through the pandemic, just support grants, assistance, but that's not where your question's going. We have tried to support that industry and will continue to do so. In terms of incentives, what gets challenging, and this is the way that I certainly think about this, is we want to focus on growing the economy here. So what we want to be careful is we don't want to incentivize whether it's one restaurant that only caters to Connecticut customers versus another, one hotel versus another that only has in-state residents. We want to make sure that, ideally all, but certainly more than half of the revenue for that entity, if it's a hospitality entity, is coming from out of state. And that's really where we should be, in my opinion, focusing our dollars. Otherwise, you're just spending money within the four walls of our economy and you're advantaging one versus another. And we've really tried to draw a hard line on that and not do that. So, to your question, for a new tourist attraction or for a new hospitality entity that's going to be very focused in a true destination, again, where in my mind more than 50% of revenues coming from out-of-state guests or out-of-state conventions, we absolutely would support something like that and utilize the same tools that we have have been utilizing with other businesses that are doing the same thing, because that's really what's going to grow the economy.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Okay, thanks. That's all I have for the moment. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Representative Rochelle.
Hey, how are you? So this has been really helpful. I was able to glance through the report. I did have a few questions of things that I didn't see in there. I'm hoping to get information on. One is it possible to get an analysis of, I know that you said that about 50% of funding you're prioritizing distressed municipalities and women minority-owned organizations. Is there a way to get a report on how much of the past 5 years or 10 years has gone to distressed municipalities, enterprise zones, opportunity zones, and which towns, and for what types of business, just so we can get a better understanding. And then from that, this will help us to really understand if there's certain towns that may not be, that may qualify but are not attaining these funds. So we need to look at which towns could use some assistance with applying for these funds, or other barriers that are keeping them from getting these funds. I want to make sure that we're actually reaching all of the towns and reaching them proportionally. And then the other question I had is the Office of Workforce Strategy. Do you coordinate with them at all? We're talking a lot about getting jobs into communities, and I brought the job CT bill onto the floor. I'm a huge fan of that bill. How are we making sure that the job training is matching, or are we incentivizing, for example, a Sikorsky to pitch in with the workforce development? We know we have not enough people for industries like manufacturing right now.
Yeah, so on the former question, absolutely, we will endeavor, and this goes back to the Senator Fonfara's question around kind of the community impact. So providing more clarity in all the programs we administer, what localities are they going to, and as much granularity as we can. So let Kyle, myself, and others take that offline. In terms of the Workforce Strategy Office, absolutely. I'm not sure if you heard there, but I'm actually with Kelly Valeries today at CCSU at a workforce strategy event focused on regional sector partnerships. So there is, even though they are not within DECD at this time, there is a lot of coordination given the labor market we are in and how tight that market is. And, there's also alignment, I would say, for example, between the job CT program and what industries we're focused on, what advanced CTs focus on recruiting, and where the regional sector partnerships are around manufacturing, in particular. So there's lots of coordination that needs to continue, and we need to stay very, very close. Otherwise, we won't be successful.
Great, thank you.
Commissioner, if you don't mind me jumping in just very quickly, Rep. Rochelle, we do have some programs. I'm open to the idea of additional programs, but we do have some programs that help towns with sort of early stage when it comes to capital projects with early stage planning. So for example, in the Brownfield program, we don't just have a program to help them with the redevelopment, the big project, so to speak. We also have a program for planning grants that helps an assessment and planning grants that help towns that are in that earlier stage do that early work that really lays the groundwork to be able to get more funds in the future. So I'm certainly on board with the concept that you introduced, and we're doing it in places already.
Yeah, I want to make sure that, I'll just give I have one town that applies and does a lot of these programs. I have another town that doesn't really apply for anything. And they are still distressed, and they are still could use this type of support. And so I think it would be really helpful to have a report to say, okay, maybe we need to be providing additional supports for these economically distressed towns if they just really don't even have the hands to pull the bootstraps. So we make sure that we're getting them where they need to be.
Understood.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Nolan.
Good morning still. Thank you for the plethora of information that you're giving out to us in regards to DECD and the annual report. I had an interesting conversation with some constituents, and they had concerns in regards to corporate taxing, in regards to tax abatements and exceptions that they can get in regards to tax credits. And I was just wondering, how do we determine how much the corporation should get? And how do we follow up on if they're how do we analyze how they're doing in regards to the tax credits that they get?
Yeah, so a couple things there. Broadly, we're trying to make the programs formulaic where we can. So Job CT is formulaic, Rep. Nolan, for example. There's no subjectivity. You don't need to negotiate with me or Deputy Commissioner Dom. It's a percentage of the benefit to the state for the jobs created in the state. So we're trying to make it very, very clear, and again, minimize the cost to reduce that and reduce the risk to taxpayers. And then in terms of how to make sure that in the Job CT program, how do we make sure that they're doing what they said they do? There's going to be regular audits, annual audits of the job formation to make sure that to get the benefit of the program over a decade, that they're doing what they said they would do and that they are creating the jobs in the state. So there's definitely, we're really simplifying this, and we're making sure there are the right checks on that over time.
Now, yeah, but how is the amount determined?
Well, so on Job CT, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
But the corporations that get those tax credits or rebates or abatement, how is that amount determined to which corporations should get in a grant?
So on the Job CT program, again, it's either 25 or 50%. It's 25 if you are not in a distressed municipality or opportunity zone. It's a 50% rebate if you are, and it's a function of how many jobs you're creating in the state of Connecticut and the wages of those jobs. So it's a 25 or 50% rebate of the net new income tax to the state of Connecticut back to that employer over time. And how did we come up with 25 or 50%? Benchmarking versus where other states are in terms of their incentives, and candidly where the state of Connecticut was previously. And we thought that this was a significantly reduced cost, but also competitive in terms of competing for some of the job formation that's out there.
And when they don't meet those agreements, what happens with the tax? Are they given a different tax?
They don't get the benefit. So if they don't meet if they don't do what they said they're going to do, there is not a benefit.
And how long are they? How is it determined the length of time before they meet those guidelines? Is it something that's put in a contract, and
Yes.
that if they don't meet it by a certain time, then it changes? And if it does, how is it determined to deal with it?
So it is typically contractual, and again, it's always dangerous to generalize, but it's typically contractual. Again, we're moving from a world of where there were a fair amount of bespoke agreements. And listen, the transaction with Sikorsky we were a proponent of, but the Job CT program, to keep with that analog, is formulaic, and those benefits are earned over 9 years, and it's a contract. If ultimately the jobs are not created and maintained, then the tax rebate doesn't go to the company.
Okay.
And if I could just chime in real quick, Representative, we have a pretty good explainer document on the Job CT program, so we could get that over to you. It's from our testimony this past session. Yeah, I think that would be helpful to understand how the program works.
Now, and the last question, is there a list or something that shows how much tax credits that these corporations, the larger corporations, get that is public?
Yeah, a bunch of it is in, Rep. Nolan, is in the annual report, and all of it's on Open Data CT as well. So it's all transparent there.
Okay. Thank you, David. I appreciate it. Hope to see you around New London sometime soon.
100%.
All right. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Representative Nolan. So I just want to remind everybody we still have more speakers, and we're closing up on the first hour and a half. And I just want to make sure that everybody realizes that. And to anybody who requested documentation, all documentation will go to the administrator and will be sent out to all three committees so that everybody has the same information. So please just don't send it directly to one state rep or state senator. Please send it directly to the administrator. Representative Dathan will be followed by Representative McCarty and then Representative Cheeseman for the second time. So Representative Dathan.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you, Commissioner. Nice to see you here today along with your team, and thank you for putting together the presentation this morning. As you might know, I come out of the early venture-backed world, and so I have a lot of interest in attracting those businesses to Connecticut because I do see a real long future. In terms of early stage initiatives, I know Representative Cheeseman talked about the SMEs. I would be more interested in sort of the early stage, what we're doing to support early stage businesses, and do we also have any tracking mechanisms to see any investments that we're making in these corporations, small corporations and startups, how they're paying off.
So thank you for the question. Yeah, the two biggest tools, for lack of a better way to say it, one of which is CT Next, and there's a new executive director at CT Next, Oni. I'm not sure if this group has a chance to meet him, or Rep. Dathan, you have, but he is, I believe, is excellent, and I think will be excellent. Glenn Thames was great in that role, but Oni has a new perspective. He's bringing a new energy, and there's a real vibrancy around CT Next for seed and pre-seed initiatives, and making sure that we're supporting those ecosystems. So CT Next and the programs that it runs and oversees is really important for those true kind of startup, very, very early stage. And then, Connecticut Innovations, we've talked about a couple of times before, but if you look at CI, and they provide a lot of transparency on their portfolio, their growth and returns. But I actually think, and this came up when the governor and I were in Israel, Connecticut Innovations is a true asset of the state, in my opinion, and it's truly unique relative to other states. So they run, I believe, just under 600 million of funds now. They've had tremendous performance. It is self-sustaining performance, whereas they have investment funds, but they're not going to be needing more funds, in my opinion. And you have, but that is a calling card for the state for high tech. And Connecticut Innovations, they have roughly, I think, 200 portfolio companies, and those companies support 5,000 plus jobs in the state. The ability for the state through Connecticut Innovations to be a co-investor, whether it's 1 million or 3 million in a lot of these companies, it's really powerful. And we've seen that firsthand. I was at a Connecticut Innovations event in New Haven the other night with over 100 CEOs. So that's a real competitive advantage of the state. And they are really, once you get past that kind of seed round and these companies are growing, even if they're still pre-revenue, Connecticut Innovations is a real asset. Even if they don't invest, they're a phenomenal convener of the ecosystem. So I think I don't think we need to create any new initiatives. I mentioned the capital-based tax before, which I still think is a real priority, fully eliminating that. But continuing to invest in CT Next and CI, and then there should be regular analysis of is the efficacy of those programs what the legislature and the executive branch wants to see. I believe the answer is unquestionably yes there, and we need to keep leaning into those two entities in particular.
So outside of their portfolio returns, do you have any sort of data to show sort of trends either in jobs or amount of
Yes.
state tax revenue? And where can I find that?
Let us get that to you. If it's not in there on their website or the annual report, let us, there's a very nice progression of kind of their not just AUM, but companies in their portfolio and jobs supported over time. It's an impressive graph. So let us get that to you in the committee.
Great, thank you very much. My second question really has to do with the pass-through entity tax. That's something that I've had a lot of concerns on in the past. Within your touching base with companies in Connecticut, is that an impediment to businesses coming to Connecticut, or is it an impediment for businesses growing here in our state? And have you heard any evidence about that outside of anecdotal?
Yeah, and again, it's finalizing kind of the true delta, I think, is what's challenging. So no, the short answer is no. Of kind of the complaints that I hear, the comments that I hear, the pass-through entity tax, or more specifically, the size of the credit that was reduced, I guess, 2 years ago or 3 years ago now. That comes up from some, but not universal, and obviously not everyone's established as a pass-through entity. I do think. Of the list of things that when you think about taxes and tax certainty, if there is an opportunity, and obviously it's all about trade-offs, I understand that, to reinstate the pass-through entity tax credit back to the full amount. I think that should be considered. From my perspective, though, it needs to be balanced with other things on the tax front. I think, when I let me say it differently, Rep. Dayton, when I think about taxes, I think about where do we truly stand out in Connecticut, and the area where we really stand out in terms of taxes is property tax. So that for me would be kind of public enemy number one. And I realize I'm getting away from businesses, but property tax is kind of the true standout. And then income tax, I think for middle income earners is, do we stand out there? Not necessarily, but in terms of where we can make the state more affordable, those are the two areas where I would focus: income tax and property tax. And that part and parcel is the pass-through entity tax, but I would probably rank it below the two I just mentioned, candidly.
Great, thank you so much. I know that's not my lane, but it's something that I'm very conscious of as something that touches business growth in our state. So thank you so much for your presentation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Representative McCarty.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and welcome, Commissioner. Thank you for your detailed report, and particularly for the recommendations. I appreciate that section very much. So my question, very quickly, on page 32, you mention in the report the domestic and international team, and then a STEP grant that helped some of the 72 companies with some of their export activities. And I'm just curious, and if you could perhaps comment, do you think that's an area that the state can really concentrate on, looking at the opportunities that may be there for more international trade and export activities? And could you just explain that grant a bit? Is that a state grant that comes out, the STEP grant? And just a little bit more about that particular initiative and what we can do.
Yeah, so as I understand the STEP grant, and I'm by no means an expert, but I think I can summarize it here. It's money that's coming through the SBA from the federal government to focus to basically help Connecticut exporters, both from a marketing perspective, and it's confusing as you try to do business overseas. You've got different legal and regulatory regimes, licensing, taxes, etc. So I do think DECD, and again with the Department of Commerce at the federal level, need to play a role here. I do think it needs to be very targeted, because I think there's the risk that you try to be too many things to too many different people and countries for that matter, and you don't do any of them well. So I think we need to focus on big companies that are in Connecticut that are looking to do export business. And when I say big companies, I mean really any companies, but ones that it typically tends to be the bigger ones that are looking to start establishing themselves overseas and touch new markets. I think we really need to take direction from companies that are looking to do export, and make sure that we're focusing on and assisting them in terms of focusing on markets that are significant, as opposed to try to be in too many different countries with too many different people. We just don't have the resources for that. And there are true experts that help companies engage in activities overseas. So we need to take direction from business, and we need to be methodical. So I think we're probably doing, in my opinion, what we need to do. We could do a bit more, but it's not an area of where I would focus a lot more resources right now.
Right, and I appreciate that answer, but is the team itself, who makes up the team that you have currently?
So it was 2 people. It's now down to 1. We're actually trying to backfill a position, and it's not a full-time job.
I see. Okay.
All
right. I appreciate that clarification, and thank you again for the report. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Representative Cheeseman for the second time, ma'am.
Thank you very much for indulging me, Madam Chair. Just very quick question for you, David. In terms of the jobs created by our new businesses, particularly small ones, do we have any way of tracking the number and the average wage? Is this something you look at? Is this something the DOL collects?
So if there is an incentive program involved, yes, we look at the wage and we make sure the jobs are there. Broadly at the state level, I don't believe, I'm pretty sure it's not broken out. New entities started within the past 2 years,
right.
Wages relative to existing. We do have access to, by industry, what are the wages by job title. So we do have that, but I don't think we're going to have it other than when there's a DECD incentive program for new companies within that industry.
Okay, thank you. And do you know, to your knowledge, is this anything that, DOL or DRS would track? It just seems to me it would be a useful metric.
I don't, what gets challenging, I don't think so. What gets challenging is it would be a useful metric, but what gets challenging is, what is a new versus an existing company in that same industry? When do you transfer them in terms of the new companies? Because there's so much change in the economy these days. I'm more focused kind of new plus existing. What type of wage growth are we seeing by sector, and where is the job creation? Is it in manufacturing versus financial activities versus somewhere else? So I don't think it's in any of those places. We can double check, but that I would probably focus a bit more on what I just mentioned.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for the answer. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Hartley for the second time.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for this very fulsome discussion, Commissioner and team. So David, I hear you on the income tax and the property tax, and yes, you're right. But I guess I want to also raise the conversation about the R&D tax credit for pass-through entities that we are trying to embrace. And I would ask that be looked at in a prioritized fashion. This speaks directly to the small guys. This is the 80% that we're talking about. That's the backbone here in this state's economy. And in particularly now the bio sector, which the state has handsomely invested in. And this is where I think the R&D credit would really be meaningful. So as a priority, I would like to see the department engage that.
Yeah, no, we are, and just to clarify my comment before, when I said income tax, I'm not talking about the high end of income tax. I'm talking for lower and middle income earners in Connecticut. I would not advocate us touching the high end. I just want to be precise in that. So we are embarking on this study around R&D tax credit. The 6% credit, potentially expanding it. I think that could be meaningful. And again, here with tax credits, consistency matters and certainty matters. So I think the question is going to be, Senator, if we are to allow it, is it up to a certain cap? Again, let's assume the General Assembly concurs. Is it up to a certain amount? And then do we feel like over the next 5 to 10 years, we can have that program appropriately market it and get the investment without having to take it away at some point in time? Speaking plainly, that's the concern I have. Is I absolutely think it could be a real advantage to innovative businesses, but I think we're going to need to make sure that we embark on this knowing it'd be sustainable over a decade. It would be very bad if we were to allow some amount of new R&D tax credit expansion, and all of a sudden in 2 years or whenever there's money is tight again, all of a sudden that's the first thing to go. Tax certainty matters so much. I can't stress that enough. Allowing something then taking away, I think that really hurts the credibility of the state and the environment. And so we're going to look at it, and we'll have a view and a recommendation. It could be something that I agree that could be quite persuasive. I just want to make sure that it's implemented if the General Assembly concurs in a way that is sustainable.
Right, targeted, small, sustainable. Absolutely. And also, and I'll be quick in view of time, the other initiative I think that's going to be very important going into this next legislative session is the I 4.0. There is going to be a very comprehensive, there's a task force that's been working now for almost a year and a half. They're going to come out with their report. This, once again, is targeted to the small manufacturers in the state of Connecticut, but it positions them to be so competitive in this next generation of manufacturing. And we're going to need some state buy-in and some, collaboration here in order to launch this program for these small manufacturers. And it will, I think, exponentially bring in an incredible return. The industrialization, helping these guys, someone said it before, they are not equipped to, have all their in-house technology and so forth. And this is where we really have to leverage and help them. So I'm asking that you, dive into this.
I agree, and it sounds like your dog also concurs there, Senator.
Yes,
But,
sorry about
well,
that.
and the one thing which I had mentioned this before, MIF has it, the Manufacturing Innovation Fund has its separate report. But to your point, that there is funding for this year and last year, 10 million a year, but there will need to be a discussion on continued funding for our small manufacturers, which is also something that I think is really important, in line with your comment, Senator.
All right, so thank you very much, Senator Hartley. Commissioner, if you could get to me later on today, or actually to our administrator, where do we stand on the $30 million of ARPA for the hospitality industry? I'm going to get some significant questions on that tomorrow, and I'd like to be able to answer that question. And then where we stand on, we added in some ability for the for-profit tourism places like Essex Steam Train to receive some dollars. And so I want to understand what we're going to do relative to that. They would have to comply with the same reporting mechanisms as the non-for-profits, but I'd like to be able to answer both those questions tomorrow, and I'm not certain that I have a good answer on that right now.
I will call you right after, but just for the group's benefit, on the 30 million of hospitality industry support, we still are on track to get that out this month, and we expect to be able to assist 2,000 businesses within that industry. So I realize we're coming to that June 30th deadline, so I'll call you afterwards, but we are on track to make that happen this month, Senator.
Thank you. And I'll call you, Commissioner, because I have 2 more meetings right directly after this, and I want to make sure that I have actual time to talk to you about that. Representative Nuccio for the first time, and then Representative Nolan for the second time. And I remind everybody that we still have, before 12 o'clock, we have 2 more tranches of people to talk to us. So we only have another 20 minutes. So go ahead, Representative Nuccio.
I will try to be brief, ma'am. Hi, David. How are you? Just wanted to check with some of the stuff that I've been listening to here. And I'm on the Governor's Workforce Council and looking at the workforce growth and such. And I'm wondering, and I'll be honest, I did not have a chance to get through everything that was sent over ahead of time. Do we have any statistics that are showing the programs that the governor has in place for workforce and for, as you had gone over, the credits that were given to organizations and that are showing direct correlation between what we assumed for growth and what we're actually seeing in the industries for growth?
So for workforce, that would need to come from Niall and Kelly. I'm with them actually now. I can check with them in terms of the programming that they're doing versus assumptions and costs for that matter. For the programs that DECD is administering, we typically have not made projections on how many entities are going to utilize a specific program, though we are reporting out, Rep. Nuccio, in the annual report, what has the utilization been and what has the return been to taxpayers, and do we think it's an effective program? We don't spend a lot of time on forecasting at the kind of micro incentive level. I'm not sure how good we would be at it, candidly. So we're more focused on just the efficacy of our programs, and if there are suggested changes, making sure that you all are aware of them.
Okay, so then that leads me to just 2 other quick things then. With the details that you do have, again, are we able to directly correlate where we're spending the taxpayer dollars to incentivize to job growth? And I want to be specific in why I'm asking that. When I was in one of the commerce meetings we had, there was a piece of legislation put forward. I didn't really agree with it, but it was basically making enterprise zones forever and ever and ever until you can prove like the poverty rate in that area went down. And we saw in some areas that we've been incentivizing growth. I want to say maybe it was Waterbury, I'm not sure, that businesses were coming in, but they're not employing the people. Like the poverty level is staying the same. So how can we find a way? Like I love what you guys are doing with linking. You actually have to have job creation in order to receive this tax benefit. But how do we now make that a little more fine-tuned to say you have to employ people in the area that you're going to in order to try to reduce the levels of poverty in that area?
Yeah, so that's, in my opinion, that gets challenging. I mean, I understand why we would want to do that and where, but the question in my mind is, versus simplicity, right? If we were to mandate, employment, it's so tough to find employees right now. And I said to a company in Waterbury, you can only have X if you're going to employ people in Waterbury. In my mind, my judgment from talking to a lot of these companies, they would say, wow, we're not going to bother. That's too many strings here. So that's why we've tried to make it simple, but reduce the benefit, reduce the amount of dollars, knowing that if they're going to locate their offices in Waterbury, whether someone's coming from, Waterbury or one of the surrounding towns, we're not letting perfect be the enemy of the good, to say it that way. We're open to kind of enhancements to any of the programs, but to us, it would really need to be simple and very, very clear. Otherwise, you're having a program that no one's going to use and is not going to be effective.
I agree with you. And I think the problem that I have with this is that we're creating legislation talking about these enterprise zones, and then we're bringing companies in and we're giving them tax credits. And the purpose of them being an enterprise zone is because they have high levels of poverty or underserved populations, but we're bringing in businesses that aren't meeting that need. So I don't know how we could kind of link these in a sense to say, X amount of your people have to, even the lower level jobs, just a way to get people out of that. Because otherwise, why do we have enterprise zones? We're just, we might be bringing more tax revenue into the state of Connecticut, but we're not doing anything to address the issues of the people who are living in poverty in those areas. So I just see it as, I know we have a short amount of time. Maybe we can sit down and talk about this at another time, but I think this is something that we need to start making these connections, or we're just putting programs in place to benefit.
We certainly should, and I don't disagree with you on enterprise zones. There should not be a perpetual enterprise zone, in my opinion. It should be a tactic, something that's used tactically, but we should make sure we can measure it. So I'm happy to take that offline and discuss further.
Sure, if you could just reach out, we could maybe set something up to talk about it. Thank you very much.
Nusi, I just wanted to jump in quickly, and in that follow-up, I think we should talk about some of the efforts that are not directly tied to enterprise zones or to our job creation incentives, but we have a lot of efforts at DECD right now to make distressed communities places where people want to live. And so we're trying on with our other hand, so to speak, we're trying to make it, we're investing real dollars into our downtowns, into our distressed communities through programs like Communities Challenge, through our Brownfields program, to incentivize people to build great housing, to build great mixed use housing, mixed use developments. And so it's a different tool. It's not the same tool you're asking about, but I think we should cover that when we follow up, so you understand what we're doing to make sure that people who work in these distressed municipalities also want to live there.
I agree. I think that's a good thing to look at, but I want to be careful that we're not incentivizing people to move in and still not doing anything about the people who are living in poverty in those areas. So great ideas. I just want to make sure we're all kind of connecting the same strings. So I know we have limited time. Kathy, sorry, I'm done.
It's all right. I understand what everybody's trying to get in. Representative Johnson, we have two more sets of people. We have only 18 minutes left now. What is your question, ma'am? You're muted.
Thank you for that. I just wanted to follow up on the idea of distressed municipalities and the enterprise zones. And that is, I think that it's really important for us who have lost the tax base. Once we lost our manufacturing, it's almost invariably in those areas. We have a huge amount of service that we do for the region with respect to providing, hospital services. We have universities. We have all these things that don't get full property tax to attract more property taxes and tax credits so that we can have these businesses here really helps the people in poverty as well. And of course, it is something that we really need to look at, because I don't think that a lot of people remember when we had manufacturing in a great tax base. And so that's what this is trying to address in part. And I'd be glad to be part of this conversation with the Economic Development Commissioner, because I think that this is a really important issue that's being raised by Representative Nuccio, because I think we really need to get out there what we've lost. And this is one way to address and bring it back. So thank you so much for that question. And thank you for the follow-up. And please include me in your remarks and any meetings you have about this.
Well, maybe we can get the Commerce Committee to do an informational forum sometime in the fall.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Commissioner, thank you very much for coming today. We really appreciate all your work. I'll give you a call a little bit later on the hospitality issues. And we're going to go directly to, does anybody else in your team have anything else, sir?
No, I think we've overstayed our welcome here. Thank you for having us, and we'll be in touch on the follow-up.
I actually don't think you've overstayed your welcome. I think that you could get another 100 questions, but unfortunately, we always have time constraints. So appreciate all the information.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Up next, we have Clark Chapin and the auditors.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Thank you very much, and good morning to everybody. Thank you for inviting us to offer testimony today. For the record, my name is Clark Chapin, one of Connecticut's 2 state auditors, and joining me today are Kathy Dunn and Brian Botticelli, who've been our auditors at DECD over the last few years and are most knowledgeable of today's subject matter. We submitted written testimony, which I'm happy to summarize. We haven't done a comprehensive review of DECD's 2021 annual report as of yet, but we're planning on doing so most likely as a separate report, unless the timing of our next regular audit of DECD permits an earlier release. We did, however, perform a cursory review and found that the 2021 annual report reflects some of the changes you enacted through Public Act 21-2 of the June special session, as well as Public Act 21-193 from last year's regular session. I'd also like to mention, since we last met in October of 2021, we've issued a performance audit compliance report, which served as a follow-up to our initial evaluation of DECD's 2017 annual report. The 2017 annual report had contained 32 findings and recommendations, and our follow-up report concluded that roughly half of the 32 recommendations had either been addressed fully or partially. There are links to both of those reports in our written testimony today. I've also included a link in today's testimony to our testimony from last October, which has a lot of additional information on our analyses of DECD's annual reports since the passage of Public Act 17-219. Overall, we've seen improvements in DECD's annual reports with fewer and less significant errors since the passage of Public Act 17-219. Thank you very much for your time today. And of course, we'd be happy to answer any questions if we can.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chapin. It's always a pleasure to see you. Does anybody have any questions or comments on the auditor's report? Well, I think Senator Hartley.
Yes, thank you very, very quickly, Madam. And welcome to Clark in your new role there. The one thing that we were really focused on when we went back and did those audits was the double counting. We heard earlier today that the Commissioner talked about their deep concern about that. I know it's only a preliminary review, but do you have an assessment on that? Because that was probably our biggest Achilles there on that report, that those numbers were repetitive in a sense.
I'll ask Brian Botticelli to address that, assuming he is on today.
Okay, I can address that. We haven't looked at that specifically for this report yet. As I said, we haven't actually reviewed the numbers. However, in our previous reviews of prior reports, that issue has largely been eliminated. There might have been a few minor errors just in their efforts to avoid duplication. Very minor amounts, but by and large, the issue has largely been addressed as far as especially large ones like electric boat, across programs or multiple instances of assistance to the same company over years, where that was also an issue in our initial evaluation of the annual report.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Any other questions for the auditors? And you all have a copy of the report, and we can always submit any questions through the administrator to the auditors if you have additional questions that did not get answered, both for the commissioner and for the auditors. So just let us know. Madam Administrator, I see that you're here. Are you trying to upgrade Mr. Zimmerman?
I think he's finally in, Madam Chair. That's why I had, you're right, you know me well. That's why I put my video on, but I believe he's accepted the promotion.
Mr. Zimmerman, are you on?
I'm here.
Okay, go ahead, sir. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, members of the many committees and chair people we have today. Thank you for the opportunity to let me testify here. SEIU represents about 65,000 active and retired members in the state. We're also a member of Recovery for All. We have workers both in the public and private sector. And once again, thank you for giving me this opportunity to testify in the 2021 DECD annual report. Last legislative session, many of you saw us working really hard for essential workers who risked their lives and fought for hazard pay. We had a success, but it was a modest victory, $30 million total for thousands of heroes. To obtain this modest sum, we had to fight for 2 sessions for what all have deemed a worthy expense. The frustration has grown as we've learned that corporations and CEOs who are turning huge profits receive assistance from DECD. Let's take, for example, Charter Communications, whose CEO is the largest paid in the state. Multiple tax credits have been sought and granted. Meanwhile, if you live in Litchfield or Tolland counties, you'd probably have a better chance of tying 2 paper cups together than getting high-speed internet. Then you have Dollar Tree, where the CEO made about $11 million last year, and we, our taxpayers, are subsidizing a very profitable corporation. This particular entity pays minimum wage and offers few benefits, if any, to its retail employees. So they have to take advantage of our state programs, such as Husky, to fill in the gaps, such as healthcare. When employees catch on, they may be being taken advantage of by Dollar Tree. They swoop in with lawyers and talking points to try and stop the workers from organizing a union. This report says it costs about $25,000 per employees retained or made with this money. If that's the case, the recipient of our large nest pays minimum, and they pay minimum wage. An employer pretty much has to pay $5,000 a year for their employee, which seems like a hell of a deal to me. SEIU understands that Connecticut didn't create this race to the bottom, but we have become all too good at it. We have been told that the EITC and child care tax credit could not be made permanent this year, while throwing about $500 million into a savings account for next year, that we can't reach our open space or farmland preservation needs in the face of climate change because it costs just too much. It's maddening and disheartening that the American oligarchs continue to accumulate wealth with DECD's help and encouragement. We look forward to developing new criteria with DECD that doesn't reward poverty wages and poor service, a system that should be targeted at those that need the assistance, not those who can work the system. So thank you so much for letting me testify on this beautiful day.
Thank you very much. Mr. Zimmerman, are there any comments or questions? Thank you so much, sir. Up next and up last is Mr. I'm not going to say your last name, right? Jarami? I'm sorry, sir. Did I say it right at all?
That's Garamy. Thanks so much,
Thank
Senator.
you. I'm sorry.
Oh, no problem at all. Good morning to the committee chairs and all the distinguished members of the committee, these committees. I'm Puya Garamy, Director of Recovery for All. Recovery for All is a statewide coalition of 60 community, faith, and labor organizations united to eliminate systemic inequalities and rebuild a better Connecticut. As all of us know, Connecticut ranks as one of the country's wealthiest states, but it also ranks as one of the most unequal. And the intertwining crises over the last few years have widened our extreme racial, economic, and gender disparities. So for one stunning example, our state's 13 billionaires have seized more than $15 billion in additional wealth since the start of the pandemic. And this is in a state where 1 out of 2 women of color earn less than $15 per hour. According to the DECD report, it appears that Connecticut's current priorities lie with further padding the wealth of big corporations and the ultra wealthy rather than investing in a strong economy for all. We can tell a tale of 2 tax credits. This year, our coalition, other members of the public, and of course, elected leaders like many of you worked hard to convince this administration to pass a wildly popular child tax credit. Sadly, this tax credit for working families will only last a year. Meanwhile, our state provides hundreds of millions of dollars in tax credits and abatements to multi-billion-dollar corporations that lower workers' living standards and block their rights to organize and improve their lives in Connecticut. I want to echo the examples that the previous speaker cited. While hugely profitable corporations benefit from tax credits from the state, their CEOs' income gains shock the conscience. DECD granted Charter with $23 million in tax credits. Its CEO grossed $42 million in personal earnings last year. DECD has granted Dollar Tree with $20 million in tax credits. Its CEO earned almost $11 million last year while paying his workers poverty wages. And even as we watch Jeff Bezos spend billions of dollars on rockets to space while Americans can't feed their families here on Earth, Connecticut has given Amazon $15 million in tax credits. The lack of transparency about exactly how much money we're giving these billion-dollar corporations is alarming. We urge the General Assembly to require that each of the contracts for credits, exemptions, or abatements issued by the DECD or Connecticut Innovations be audited annually by the State Auditors of Public Accounts with definitive information on accurate accounting of full monetary benefits received by each corporation's effective state and federal tax rates after benefiting from these credits, subsidies, and exemptions, and the ratio of each corporation's CEO compensation compared to the median salary of its workers. Finally, we ask that the General Assembly request specific written plans from DECD as to how it will implement Section 92 of the just passed midterm budget adjustments. The agency should be required to provide an equity analysis of the impact their investments will have and how they'll provide benefits, credits, and subsidies in a way that will actively reduce and eliminate Connecticut's morally unconscionable inequalities. Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Girardi. Are there any comments or questions? Seeing none, thank you so much, sir. So we have reached the end of this particular session. Madam Administrator, you're on the screen. Do you have anything that you would like to impart to us on next times when we will be together, or anything else here?
Well, this went so well that the Appropriations and Commerce Committees will be gathering again in the near future. We anticipate receipt sometime next week of the Small Cities Community Development Block Grant Allocation Plan, and a joint hearing will be scheduled with the Appropriations, Commerce, and Housing Committees. We're trying to find a date sometime in late June or early July. So that will be a joint public hearing followed by committee meetings. So there will be a vote on the part of each of the 3 committees.
Thank you very much, Madam Administrator. I know Representative Walker is in her car on her way up to the Capitol. Representative Walker, do you have any comments? I know she's driving, so I'm going to take her silence as I'm going to pay attention to driving. Senator Minor, do you have anything?
Thank you, Madam Chair. No, I am all set. I'm here in Hartford waiting for the next meeting to start.
Representative France. Senator Fonfara.
No, nothing from me, Madam Chair. Thanks very much for a well-run committee today, as usual. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Scanlon. Senator Martin. Representative Cheeseman.
No, thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Senator Hartley.
All set, thanks. Well done, Sue. Appreciate it.
Representative Curry.
Thanks very much and enjoy your birthday too.
Representative Buckby. And I know that Senator Martin I've already called. Thanks everybody. I hope you get a chance to go outside. It was a little dreary earlier today, but it's actually quite comfortable. So I hope you all enjoy the day and I look forward to seeing you over the summer. Have a wonderful day.
Take care.
Have a great day.